Our next instigation is going to be moderated by the incredible young Jean Lee. I will bring her up here and say only this, that her question that she posed to me and a colleague of mine 3 years ago is really what started to get us in all this question-asking trouble. Brilliant artist and a dear friend, young Jean Lee. Thank you, ma'am.
So, one thing that I was thinking while I was sitting here was that, as a society, we're so conditioned to live on autopilot and also to consume. So we come to something like this, and we sit in the audience and we consume the information, and or we come to the theater and we consume a show. And Mark is always trying to, I feel like, get us out of that pattern. So I brought a show here a few years ago, Untitled Feminist Show, and it was a bunch of people with female coated bodies and all different shapes and sizes, doing all this stuff in the nude without language. And I did this show all over the world, and all over the world people consumed it and had their personal experiences. And that was sort of that. But with Mark, he created this whole sort of community group called the Body Politic around this show, where community members were engaging with this topic. And from what I've heard, people have built careers out of sort of what the discussions that came out of that group. So I think what Mark wants us to do today is to basically engage. So pretty much the most important part of what we're going to do today is going to be the moment where we turn it over to you to have the conversations. So what I would love for you guys to do is, when people come out and they start talking, just wait for the moment where you wake up. Where the autopilot clicks off, where the consumption stops, and you engage. A question comes into your head, a problem comes into your head. You're like, what is this? What's going on here? Something bothers you, so that will be your mission. Just listen to what these people have to say. Wait for your soul to wake up, and then we'll give you an opportunity to discuss that and become a part of this conversation. So I would like to introduce first Sonya Renee Taylor and Shaun Leonardo. Oh no, Will Chase is the next person coming out. Then Danielle Strachman is the next person coming out, and then Will Chase and Shaun Leonardo.
Hi, folks. How you doing? Awesome. My name is Sonya Renee Taylor, and I am the founder and radical executive officer of The Body Is Not an Apology, an international movement and organization focused on radical self-love and body empowerment as the foundational tool for social justice and global transformation. Just up to some little stuff. My instigation is, when systemic oppression, inequity, and injustice are eradicated, I believe we will absolutely eradicate them. Will we be equipped to create a new world? What will we need and how will we get there is what I'm most interested in. About a month ago, Black Lives Matter activists attempted to get inside of a Hillary Clinton rally, and they were stopped at the door and put into a side room, which I think is its own interesting piece of information. But she did grant them audience later on and said to them, look, I don't believe you change hearts. I believe you change laws, you change allocation of resources, you change the way systems operate. You're not going to change every heart. You're not. Only to follow up last week and then tell a room full of LGBT activists that they changed her heart. I was like, that's fascinating. Sometimes all you can do is notice, right? What happens when we don't change hearts? What happens when we don't change hearts? This if you're looking at these images, what we're looking at is a world of unchanged hearts, right? A world where we changed some laws, right? We changed that law that meant that my ancestors came here in shackles, and then we changed it, and then it meant that my ancestors exited and entered out of back doors and had dogs sicked on them. We saw indigenous people who are the rightful owners of this land be horrifically massacred, murdered, and displaced. We've seen internment camps for Japanese Americans. We've seen the US being the world's leading jailer. We've seen Ahmed be taken away in shackles for building a clock. We've seen costumes that mimic and joke domestic abuse and violence. This is what happens when we don't change hearts. We changed laws. We changed all of these laws, right? And we still live in this world that does this. And so, it's actually essential that if we want a different world, that we have to have changed beings. We actually have to transform us. Otherwise, we will continue to create what it is we have already created. The brilliant revolutionary Grace Lee Boggs says, being a victim of oppression in the United States is not enough to make you revolutionary, just as dropping out of your mother's womb is not enough to make you human. People who are full of hate and anger against their oppressors, or who only see us versus them, can make a rebellion, but not a revolution. Therefore, any group that achieves power, no matter how oppressed, is not going to act differently from their oppressors as long as they have not confronted the values that have internalized and consciously adopted different values. If we don't change us, we don't change the world. The Body is Not an Apology is focused on what we call radical self-love, and we believe that radical self-love is the foundational access to radical human love. And without radical human love, we change systems, we change laws, and we don't change the world. We change the configuration of oppression to be more appealing, to be more palatable, to be more digestible. While the people who are living under the circumstances of those oppressions don't have more palatable, more digestible lives. Eric Garner did not have a more digestible life. He had a disposable life on a street in New York City. We did not change hearts. And so we believe that shifting, I love that this radical presence exhibit is here right now, because radical is about going from the root or origin. It's fundamental indifference. It's extreme. It favors drastic political, economical, and social reforms. It's the forming basis and foundation, and it exists inherently. That is the kind of love that we have to be manifesting in ourselves and in the world to create anything that is going to be sustainable when we eradicate the horrors that currently exist. I believe we will eradicate them. Will we be prepared to create something new? Thanks.
My name is Danielle Strachman, and I have worked in alternative education for about 15 years. My mission has been to enable young people to have choice in their world, and for me that starts at education. So when I was asked to speak on this panel, I'm still admittedly a bit nervous because of the topic of the body. I thought, what do I have to say about the body? But I figured something out. And it's the body of knowledge. So one of the things that I like to think about a lot is who or what constitutes a body of knowledge. Does it belong in a university? Does it belong in a school? Does it belong in our public institutions? Does it belong in books? Does it belong in people? Does it belong in which people? Does it belong in teachers? Does it belong in students, parents? Where is it? And this is a question that drives me every day. Things are changing rapidly. Is a diploma knowledge, or is it a symbol of knowledge? What if you don't have the right type of diploma or from the right type of place? What are the impacts of knowledge being owned by institutions is something that I like to think about. Additionally, our understanding is changing every single day. With things like Wikipedia, the internet, Twitter doing reporting on news, we are getting a massive amount of information, but we can't track what we know as much as we used to. There's not a degree-granting body that says, oh, you read all these books in your spare time, so therefore you get this degree. Right now, we're still saying that an institution has to say that you have a body of knowledge, and I'm just not sure that that's true anymore. Additionally, when I think about young people are true digital natives. They are growing up with masses of information, that is new to someone like myself. I'm 35. And so how do we quantify that? And how do we figure out within our other institutions and hiring agencies who knows what? And that brings me to the last part of the question, is how do we share our knowledge going forward? There's some really interesting trends that are going on. Even in big institutions, places like Ernst & Young, an accounting firm, like accounting, this is not big, sexy stuff. They are changing the way that they are doing hiring. It used to be that they insisted on your school and your GPA as to get your foot in the door, and now they're doing their own assessments first, and that's the first take. They're still looking at what your GPA is, they're still looking at where you went to school, but it's more in a second or third tier now. And I find these things really, really inspiring, because it all goes back to where is that body of knowledge? Is it in us? Is it in an institution? Is it in a piece of paper? And how do we relate to other organizations with what we know? So that's what I'd like us to think about. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Will Chase. I am the Minister of Propaganda for Burning Man. And that title is sort of a joke, but not really. I also have my own company called Will Chase Arts. I'm doing art curation and event management for festivals around the Bay Area mostly. So I curate large-scale sculpture into festivals. And I also run a monthly storytelling series called Fireside Storytelling here in San Francisco, which features 6 storytellers telling stories based on a theme once a month. And the question that I wanted to bring up for this, when I thought about what the goal for this forum was, in terms of helping to inform what the future programming for YBCA should be and how it should work, especially as YBCA is shifting towards more community engagement, civic engagement, that's where my heart is. And I believe firmly that the arts have a strong capacity to make cultural change. But the way that that's actually going to happen is if we are communicating effectively with our audience. And we are, is it up there? There we go. Traditionally, the arts have a tendency to speak in a very high-minded sort of language, and it can tend to be an echo chamber that doesn't really immediately address the people who need it most. And I believe that the change that needs to be made for the world to be a better place from here on out is necessarily going to be a collaborative action. It's necessarily going to require the grassroots to be engaged. And the way that we can do that most effectively to engage those folks is to to understand that audience and speak to them in the most effective way possible, in a way that's going to engage them and inspire them and instigate change for them in their own hearts and minds. And a lot of that involves immediacy. One of the principles of Burning Man is immediacy. And the most powerful change that I see happen year after year, and the one thing that you'll hear most from any burner who's gone to Burning Man for the first time is, Burning Man changed my life. And the reason it changes their lives is, of course, up to that individual, but it's almost invariably the fact that they had an immediate experience that directly affected them on that gut level and changed them, they communicated with them. And usually that was a result of being amongst other people in that community who also share that ideal, who see, they get inspired by the actions that they see around them. That's the kind of engagement that we need to have for all of the things that we're doing, all the things that these instigators and speakers are talking about, and all the programming that needs to happen needs to engage those people in a way that they can actually relate to it on that personal level. And we've got to be very, very careful with that. So I felt like that was the most important question I could raise, sort of a meta question across all of these different topics that people are talking about is, are we effectively communicating with our audience? And a lot of that is, of course, knowing your audience. I apologize in advance for not having really beautiful pictures of Burning Man, but you can look those up on our website. I know you were expecting that, but I just don't have any. I wanted to talk more about this, like who is your audience? Really understand them, what they're about, and go out and talk to them, connect with them, go out to the streets of Greece, find out what they're about and what reaches them, really know them, and know the technology and the tools that are being used these days for effective communication and the strategies and the mechanisms to do that. It's changing, as you were saying, it's changing all the time, and it's changing rapidly. There's a very large signal-to-noise ratio problem. The world is very, very noisy. How do you elevate your signal above everything else? How do you get people to actually pay attention for longer than 10 seconds? You can look at Google searches after a mass shooting, and how quickly the Google searches go up for a mass shooting and then completely crash right immediately after it. Like it becomes another hashtag. So how do you engage in your communication with people in an effective way that's actually going to stick beyond that 1 minute? Because we need their attention, we need their engagement. So how do you do that? Oops, went to the wrong thing. Effectively, how do you do it? How do you communicate effectively with people? How are you going to actually reach them in a way that really touches their hearts and inspires them and engages them? And what we do at Burning Man and what we do at Fireside Storytelling in particular is create that context in which those kinds of communications can happen the most effectively in ways that are those direct heart-to-heart inspiring communications. And what I do at Burning Man as Minister of Propaganda is I hold a mirror up to the community and show what the incredible things are that are happening in that community in an effort to, and then craft that into what I believe is very good storytelling that inspires other people out in the world to pick up their own creative inspiration, their own creative spark, and turn that into something that is actually engaging and get them to actually act on that. And that's what we're doing at Burning Man, and that's what I encourage all of us to do as we move forward with YBCA programming to, in a more community-engaged kind of way. How do you get those people to how do you communicate with them as effectively as possible to get them to engage that way? Thank you.
My name is Shaun Leonardo. I'm an artist. I'm represented in the exhibition Radical Presence, and honored to be here and honored to be in the exhibition. Since I'm in the Fabiana seat, I'm also gonna stand because I'm a performer, How does the body wear trauma is my one and only question. My most recent performance, I Can't Breathe, is a public participatory performance framed as a self-defense workshop. Audience members come, I ask them to participate, and I teach them a range of maneuvers, how to get out of a hold, how to get out of a grab, how to defend a punch, and that culminates with the chokehold. The same chokehold that took the life of Eric Garner. And I can't show people how to get out of a chokehold because that would require going on the offense, and that's not my job. That's not my role. But what I hope to do is teach people how to create just enough space to breathe. It then seamlessly transitions into a performance by giving them cues, the participants' cues that are within a script, words by Nina Simone. And so with these cues, the participants enact the self-defense techniques, and it becomes an overall composition or movement that becomes a meditation or is a meditation and reflection on our community's need to self-preserve, to self-protect, and to survive. But for some of us, especially young people of color, that survival mode is a constant. That's a day-to-day experience, whether it's being surrounded by crime in the housing developments or walking through metal detectors at school or the constant agitation by police. That fear, that sense of danger, that aggression lives within. And so I conduct that performance because I hope that people will internalize the tragedy of Eric Garner's death in a different way, and that they leave the room no longer not able to talk or feel about that event in a different way. But for young people of color, we now know, we're now discovering that that heightened alertness of always feeling in danger is something aligned to PTSD. That the trauma lives and pervades everything, every interaction a person may have, right? It's like that sense of always being on guard, that something is going to go wrong, that someone's going to hurt you and someone's going to take advantage of you. That's trauma and repeated trauma. But I want to go beyond that to understand beyond how this affects people's ability to deal with one another, and again, thinking about our young brothers and sisters of color, how that makes folks unable, literally, to assess a situation correctly because they're always expecting aggression, violence. But I want to move beyond that to understand what happens in the moments where a person is alone. How does it live within? How does it play out in the body, the way that the shoulders slump, right? The way that your hands don't operate correctly. The blank look of disengagement that we see in these young folks' faces. The inability to be self-aware, and the impossibility of being present in one's own body. I think was I pressing this as this happened?
All right, so what's gonna happen next is actually like not, I mean, hopefully it's fun, but it's not supposed to be a fun moment of audience participation. Like it's actually like we are requesting a generous act of service on your part for YBCA. Because, you know, Mark actually will use your ideas, and he'll have them in his head while he is deciding about the future of this organization and how to proceed. And obviously, like, we can't hear what everybody comes up with today, but he's made a hashtag, YBCA100, and if you tweet your question that you came up with today and you hashtag it, then he's gonna go through all of them, and they'll feature some of them, and so it's there. As much as you're willing to be engaged with this, the better for YBCA. So instead of moving into sections, like I would like you to just turn to whoever's around you. You can form groups, or you can just talk to whoever's next to you and just discuss the moments where for you woke up. Like a question came into your head, you made a connection, it would be great if you didn't take this moment to like not a break, wait for the water. It's not that much longer, and just share this with the person next to you and see what kind of conversation comes up, and then we'll ask some of you to share what you came up with. So starting now. And we're only giving you 5 minutes so that it doesn't have a chance to turn into a conversation about, you know, your life. Okay. All right. So Mark wants you guys all to be cut off at the moment of peak interestingness of your conversation so that there will be more to continue. So if anybody would like to share a question or an instigation or a provocation that came up for them, that would be great.
We were struck by the performance and this idea of needing, you know, a space to breathe and wearing trauma. And we were concerned that wearing trauma and this expecting the worst may affect women even more so than men, because the police and the threat to your own body and your family is real, but then the way that men are able to mistreat women, and that's a kind of regular thing. How can we highlight and address that without forgetting about the wider problem too?
Mm-hmm.
Over there. Right there, Summer.
How do you, our question is, how do you break through the shutdown that happens when trauma occurs in the body to tap into, we were kind of thinking about connecting all of these questions. How do you tap into the body of knowledge and the body of communication and the body of self-awareness and the body of personal experience, to tap into that? How do you break through the shutdown, the disembodiment, the disengagement that happens?
And you mean not just the individual body, you're talking about like all kinds of different bodies.
Speaking, yes, specifically to the personal, but then, yes, absolutely, the body of all of us, the community.
We were thinking about both radical self-love and trauma, and could there be some very intentional intervention with young people to fortify them to withstand or forestall that, instead of just helping them respond, actually to try to prevent it?
Yeah, our discussion centered around healing and the ways in which the kinds of healing that's required for young people and anyone who is experiencing post-traumatic stress, but how to do that within a society that's already so hostile at the same time. And so in those nurturing places where one can find support into another hostile environment, and what are the ways in which maybe that also needs to be addressed, but who takes on that responsibility? Yeah.
We ended up having a slightly different thought about the questions. And we were wondering whether or not there was a way to turn the how does the body wear trauma into a way to be much more transparent to one another about our trauma and others. How could we create the opportunity to physically wear our trauma? In other words, show our trauma more overtly so that we can be better connected and more transparent. And then maybe that allows us to set it free.
And we were talking about how there's not an easy process to get better from trauma, and it's hard to love yourself, but that it requires a journey of the self into a community. So the question is, how can we talk about trauma not as exclusion, but as inclusion?
Yeah. So we were also approaching the trauma question, but from the lens that it puts over the viewer or the consumer of art, that if everyone is responding from their own vantage point, then how do you actually communicate with them? That the job of the artist in this day and age is to put people into positions where they can actually feel and experience in their own body what you're trying to communicate. That it's no longer enough to look, but to feel.
So we did something a little different. We were making statements because we didn't think that we were supposed to ask questions, but I came up with something, well, we did all together, that through radical self-love, the body of knowledge will change. And in that changing of the body of knowledge, the communication will change and it will become much more efficient. And through that efficient and effective communication, the trauma will be alleviated.
He just solved that.
One more.
Reframing a question, tying the two panels together, how can we acknowledge that there are necessary somatic experiences in the body that are the pathway to both pleasure and to healing of trauma?
Actually, we have time for one more. Let's get one more. These are all really good.
Question is everyday life for everyone in their own way trauma naturally, and is it killing us or is it making us stronger?
Great. Wow, you guys did good. All right. Let's give a round of applause to the audience. That was really good. Hashtag YBCA100 on Twitter, for those of you who didn't get a chance to share. Okay, so what, did any, while you guys were listening to each other or to anything that they said, were there any sort of like wake up question moments that came up for you?
There was a thought that popped into my head that was really just about tying some of these things together, and I think someone may have said it out here, but which is self-knowledge. And so whether that's something that you feel in the body or is a feeling that's coming up, things like that, just getting in touch with that, because it's going to help how you communicate, and sort of like someone over here was saying, all these things can sort of tie together to have an effect. So just this idea of self-knowledge as something within the body was coming up for me.
One of the things that was sort of really resonating with me in relationship to the questions and to each one's discussion is this idea of how do we make trauma not a space of stigma and shame, which then allows us the access to like give that space love as a tool of healing. And I think that one of the things that's so important for us to remember, particularly when we're talking about young kids of color, is that they're actually not experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. They're experiencing present traumatic stress disorder. Right. People who are living in oppressive situations are living in them constantly, daily, all the time. And so one of the things that I think is so important is how do we continue to have a fountain of healing that is as steady as the fountain of oppression, so that we are constantly creating a regenerative process to the bombardment of trauma until we alleviate those external systems of trauma. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think what struck me the most was the idea of really internalizing the experience in order to be able to really have it hit home and land. Like I mentioned about the Google searches for after a mass shooting, that's just one of the most traumatic statistics for me. It's like how quickly people forget and how things quickly. It's way too easy to have stuff just bounce off your attention span these days. And so how do you have things land? How do you have them actually have that impact and get people engaged around them to take them forward and actually take action on them. And Shaun's work in, we were talking while you guys were talking about what he's doing with the chokeholds. Like, I can't think of a better way to get somebody to actually experience what's going on, rather because if you just hear the story, you're not gonna, it's just gonna go in one ear out the other. Maybe it clicks a little bit. Maybe you do something with, maybe you don't. But once these experiences need to really truly be internalized by people who don't experience them on a regular basis, so they can become part of your community and part of your collaborative effort to solve these problems.
There's so much I want to say right now. But, and again, just to piggyback off what you're saying, when I constructed this piece, I realized that the only way people could internalize this kind of tragedy is to see it in real space, real time. Until you see someone get put in a chokehold or until you feel it, you don't truly understand the lack of humanity that is there, or not there, I should say. So if I were to sort of try to sum this all up, I really do think there's psychological work to do. And one of the ways and I'm glad this was steered to healing, because I think one of the ways that art can assist along with healing is creating this space where radical love is not an exception, that it is expected and needed, and people can surface their trauma and be in communication about it. But I also want to be realistic in that, psychological healing takes that's long-term work. And when I share this piece with young people of color, I also give them the tools, very specific tools, that will allow them to just deal with the day-to-day trauma. And just to give a really quick example, we know that this has failed, right? That this is reception, this is submission. But what I teach young people of color is that this is a defensive posture. This gives you enough time and enough space to think, try to be aware of your surroundings, and assess if an aggressive response is actually necessary. Give them the tool. And so if I were to instigate this even further, the question I throw back onto you is what are the strategies that you can take in each individual world to give not only tools, but spaces for healing? In your worlds, in everyday life. Who do you have around you that you can share and create spaces for radical love? Sorry to get all.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, so my question, listening to all of this, there's clearly. The thing that's coming up for me is this question of healing, because that's what it all comes down to. Like, there's healing in our idea of the body of knowledge, the way that we think about knowledge, about the way that we think about our own bodies, and then there's this trauma that already needs to be healed, both individually inside people and and within these communities that we're trying to engage with, and reach? Like where, I guess my question is, where do we start? It seems to start in the individual body for you, and for you, and, we're so, like what does that look like, Like as somebody who's grown up in a culture that trains you to hate yourself, like where do you begin?
For me, the beginning is really about undoing the indoctrination of self-hate, and then recognizing that actually the reason why self-hate exists systemically is because it's profitable, right? That it's intricately tied to a system of capitalism.
Yes.
It's intricately tied to systems of domination and imperialism. And so as what we do at The Body Is Not an Apology is we help people awaken to whose interest your self-loathing really is. And as you become awake to whose interest your self-loathing is, then you're like, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't my idea. Like this, the way I feel about my thighs isn't actually my idea. it's a given idea.
Right.
And as we receive these given ideas, we can actually learn to give them back. Like, actually, I don't want that anymore. And then that creates a clearing for what it is you do want. It creates the space to create a new relationship. And then the piece that's important for me is that as we shift our relationship with our individual beings, we begin to see bodies different. Not only ours, we begin to see bodies different. Bodies of knowledge, bodies of communication, other beings' bodies in an expanded way, which is the opening for a radical self-love that translates to a radical human love.
Great. So question, who's
my cheering team over here?
So the question for me that sort of is now, like, who profits from my self-hatred? Hashtag YBCA. In relation to the question we had from the audience about, how do we prevent this, in young people in advance? It's like we just train them to be vigilant about that question.
To see it, and to see it when it's coming.
Yeah.
Shameless plug, The Body's Not an Apology does webinars every last Sunday and Monday where we tackle that. So go to thebodiesnotapology.com, sign up.
Great. Oh my God, this is like the best conversation I've had in so long. Thank you, everybody. This is amazing.